and I welcome you to the Climate Connect series of interviews on post-2012 carbon markets. We have already seen some of the fantastic interviews we have been doing in the past few weeks, and regarding the Japanese schemes, the Chinese schemes, and today we go to the other part of the world, the Australian subcontinent. And as you probably know, that Australia is currently in the process of framing a carbon legislation. So we thought, it's a very good idea to cover that part of the world. And we have an expert from Australia for doing that. May I introduce Jennifer Lauber to you. She is currently based at the National Australian Bank, NAB, and she is a well-known expert in emissions and energy markets in Australia. So Jennifer, let me start straight away here. What's the status of the scheme at the moment?
At this stage, the Clean Energy Package is likely to be passed on the 8th of November. The legislation is going to the upper house, the Senate in Australia, next week, and at this stage is expected to pass.
Right, so that's excellent news. After the long pause of having the scheme, maybe in an Australian scheme very much in the near future. So, if I may ask, what are the main drivers for Australia at the moment for passing this legislation?
The legislation is seen as very important in creating a lower carbon Australia.
Right.
The current government talks a lot about Australia being internationally competitive, and it needs to play its role in reducing emissions. Australia has committed to a 5% reduction from 2000 levels by 2020, and the government sees this as the most cost-effective way of actually achieving that target, and offers in the legislation a number of incentives to also help industry transform to a lower carbon economy as well.
Right. So basically it's clearly one of the main focus areas of the policy at the moment. And if I may ask, what's the sentiment in the private sector in Australia like regarding the legislation?
There's a lot of mixed views in the legislation, and that's understandable because some corporations will be impacted in different ways. There are some industries where there will be opportunities, like there's a carbon farming initiative which will enable farmers, for example, in certain circumstances to create carbon offsets. And these offsets will be carbon credits that the liable entities will be able to use to meet their liability. So there'll be a lot of opportunities that will be provided, but there'll also be a number of entities that will have to look at how they risk manage most effectively the costs that this business will impose to their operations.
And I think you're right about the fact that there's a lot of mixed feeling, and maybe that's just because of the early stage of the entire new mechanism. Like our informed audience does know that what happened in the EU ETS in the past for the first 2 years, there's a lot of uncertainty of what will happen, but now everything is set. And in terms of the preparations which you are seeing, what kind of preparations are the companies and the corporations, the small, the big players in Australia making for this legislation at the moment?
In some ways, a lot of companies are actually progressed in some aspects. In Australia, we have national greenhouse energy reporting legislation that requires a lot of the liable entities to measure their footprint and report their footprint. So this process is something that is already in place. So most liable entities know what their footprint is. So this is the next stage in them looking at how they can risk manage that. I think what most corporations will wait to see is that this actually does get passed. And given that the scheme has a fixed price period for the first 3 years, starting from the 1st of July, it will give corporations time to understand the legislation and to work out how they can manage their risk. So probably in the first 12 months there will be a lot of work on strategy, risk management, looking at reducing emissions within their operations rather than buying carbon credits, looking at all the different options. So I think there'll be a real focus around strategy. Also, all the detailed regulations still need to be developed.
Right.
So until the regulations are formed, the details, important details of the scheme haven't yet been determined. And a good example of that is in the flexible price of the scheme, which is in the 4th year, that will start on the 1st of July 2015, there's a cap price and there's a floor. So with eligible international units, such as certified emission reduction units that will be eligible under the scheme, there is a $15 floor. Now, how that operates may affect whether corporations buy certified emission reduction units or not, depending on accounting implications and whether they can get price certainty, depending on how that will operate. Now, the government is going to have a white paper out this week that will discuss how that floor will discuss this and get input, consultation on what is the best way to manage this. So I think this will be a very important issue, because what I'm seeing from Europe, particularly at this conference, is there is a lot of excitement from the European community that there will be another buyer of certified emission reduction units in the market. And however, this floor price does add a few complications, and the way that is determined, I think, could impact liquidity.
I think that's a very beautiful explanation of the carbon scheme, which is likely to be a reality in the near future. Let's shift towards some of the impacts of this carbon scheme. I know you have a background in the power markets as well. So how are the generators reacting to it? And basically, what will the impact on generators really?
There will be an impact on generators. There is an energy security package that will be offered to generators, so they will get, some generators will get compensation depending on the energy intensity of the actual generation. Others won't, so it is a little bit mixed, but there is some support for some of the ones that will be most impacted. I think what the government wants to make sure as part of this package is that the generation continues, because energy security is actually really important. The idea is, though, as part of the scheme, is that they will look at taking some brown coal-fired capacity out of the market.
Right.
And the government is going to go through a process, or is starting a process, to actually enable people to bid for taking capacity off and reduce our reliance on brown coal generation. So that's a process that's happening at the moment. From a risk management perspective, a lot of the generation companies are pretty sophisticated from a hedging perspective.
Right.
So electricity trading is not a simple commodity to trade. So there's a lot of sophistication in the generation market in terms of trading. So transitioning to being in a carbon market, I think, is something that the power sector in particular will transition. That will be quite smooth.
And are you seeing already some signs of international participation, especially from Europe and the US in the scheme? Are like new players coming in to provide advice, or basically set up their businesses in Australia?
Yes, I think some people are waiting to make sure that legislation is actually passed first, and there is that certainty. And also, whilst the scheme may be passed next week, because of the fixed price period, it might take time before the trading market does develop. So we have seen some new players come in, and particularly the investment banks.
Right.
But what they've started to do is participate in electricity trading and be ready for carbon trading when carbon trading actually does start to participate. But apparently Carbon Expo, which is going to be in Melbourne next week, there's a lot of participation of international companies. So I think there'll be a lot of companies that will be looking at the opportunity in Australia next week. And if the news is positive, it won't surprise me if we see a lot of European operations setting up in Australia.